Philosophical perambulators of this grand oratorical amphitheatre, allow me to elucidate upon a momentous affair, a moment in which destiny, the digital colossus of rhetorical precision, extends both approbation and admonition to Kyle Kulinsky. An affair so layered, so multidimensional, that it demands not mere commentary, but a hermeneutical exegesis.
Some other person on that show mentioned something about how I don't know if it was a conversation about Palestine, but they said something like, I would rather be like a person in the Middle East than a person in Texas. And it was just like, what are we talking about right now, guys? Like, Jesus, just some of the comments that they'll make around, you know, like Democrats and Republicans are both horrible when it comes to people in the United States. It's one of the worst countries in the world for African Americans, for Black people, for Georgia. It's like, can we, like, there has to be a way where we can be critical of our side, but not be so far gone that this has to do with my criticism of like, so I'm looking at like Kulinsky a lot now, who, when Kulinsky is like four sides related to the Democratic Party, he's for a lot, and I appreciate that. He doesn't mince words with attacking the right, and I'm grateful for that. At least it's not like both sides are the same. He doesn't do the both sides thing, which I appreciate. But like a lot of that rhetoric, or the anti-American foreign policy rhetoric, you have to understand there's like certain rhetoric that you engage in that you can't really come back from. You can't have it both ways. If you've stoked the flames of your community to believe that we are legitimately supporting like an indiscriminate against group of people over and over and over and over again, and we love it and we love, there is no coming back from that to tell them to vote for the party. It's like when Trump had convinced the entire United States that COVID was like a fake Chinese whatever, and then turned around and tried to get credit for the vaccine. Even Trump couldn't overcome that. Trump can't take credit for the vaccine now because he convinced his audience that it's fake, that it was. So yeah, I wish that the criticisms, because I've seen a lot of people talk about or starting to echo some of the more, I'll say, extremist or radical rhetoric that I've had. I'm not saying that like the goal should be to become sycophantic Democratic Party supporters where we don't hold our own accountable. I think the goal should be that we should have a greater depth of analysis. We need to create more space where we can say, yeah, Kamala Harris or Joe Biden doing this, I think this was pretty bad or pretty dumb. I think Joe Biden maybe had issues that people should have recognized earlier. These are good criticisms. I would vote for Joe Biden in a coma before putting Donald Trump back in the White House. That's a very easy thing to say as well. Like, both criticisms can be true at the same time. And
I think,
go.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that the criticism has to come within the confines of our political like environment. In that we have two parties, and so it can't just be, if it's going to be like, it always has to, like, I'm not going to repeat like the Joe Biden line of like, don't compare me to the almighty, compare me to the alternative, but like it is that line, like it is always a choice between the two. And so I think like you can be critical and you should be critical, but it has to exist within the confines of what the alternative is. And like, you know, I was looking at like, and I don't do foreign affairs on my channel. I just focus on domestic policy, and it's mostly it's been especially heavily focused on legal issues and voting rights issues. Like that is one of the principal focuses on my channel. I try to like stay in my lane and what I know best. Mm-hmm. But just looking at, I think, the uncommitted movement and that whole aspect of it, like it took 5 minutes before Trump named a cabinet that I think will probably, like, you know what I'm going to say? Like this cabinet with like Marco Rubio and who is the person was it Rubio that said, I will never call for a ceasefire? Yeah.
Either that, or I know Huckabee has said some insane, crazy stuff as well.
I mean, these are the most hardline. And so again, I just wish the criticism, I wish the criticism that was leveled against the Democrats, which, like, not taking that away from anybody, everybody's entitled to their opinion on how Democrats handled Israel, Gaza. And again, it's not my lane, so I don't really, I'm not like, I don't have enough knowledge to be able to say one way or the other. But like, it has to exist in the confines of like, well, the alternative is going to be really bad and much worse. And like, it is. And there's no doubt that like what we have now is objectively worse for people for whom that's a principal issue, that having Mike Huckabee, having Marco Rubio, and like these neocons, these uber pro-Israel neocons, that's going to make them that's going to be a lot worse objectively for that movement. And so again, all of that is to say, like, to your broader point, that the criticism has to come within the confines of like the context that we find ourselves in, not just like the Democratic Party in a vacuum, because it doesn't exist in a vacuum. It exists as a binary choice between Democrats and Republicans. And so often it's just never viewed through that lens.
Brace thyselves as we traverse this quagmire of ideological brinksmanship, political utility, and rhetorical extremities with the vigor of Achilles at Troy and the subtlety of Socratic inquiry. Destiny's praise for Kulinsky is not born of blind allegiance, but of measured admiration. Here, amidst the ever-churning tumult of partisanship, Kulinsky stands as a beacon, a vox clamantis in deserta, unafraid to castigate the Democratic Party when warranted, yet sufficiently sagacious to eschew the intellectual pergamentum of both sidesism. It is a balancing act as delicate as Daedalus's wings, demanding the rejection of sycophantic apologia while preserving a modicum of realpolitik understanding. And in this, Destiny rightly finds resonance. Kulinsky, in his critique of the Democratic Party, strikes a vital chord, neither serenading nor eulogizing, but interrogating. The altitudinous trapeze of American politics, however, exists within the confines of a rigid binary. Destiny, ever the clarion of Logos, admonishes those who fail to appreciate the context, a context forged not in idealism's ethereal furnace, but in the terrestrial muck of two-party governance. To dismiss the Democrats in isolation is to engage in myopic dereliction. It is political abstraction divorced from consequence, a praxis as hollow as an echo in a sepulchre. Kulinsky, unlike the purveyors of performative radicalism, treads this razor-thin precipice. His invectives, though severe, remain ancora veritatis, anchored to the reality of the alternative, the GOP's ever-burgeoning descent into neoconservative turpitude. And here lies the rub, the fulcrum upon which Destiny mounts his praise. Kulinsky, in his capacity for calibrated critique, acknowledges that the alternative to the Democrats is not a shimmering utopia, but a veritable coelum obscurum, a cataclysmic redux of Rubio, Huckabee, and the hawkish archons of Republican dominion. To pretend otherwise, Destiny reminds us, is to engage in frivolitas maximus, the fool's errand of rhetorical nihilism. Kulinsky resists this seduction, refusing to immolate his pragmatism upon the altar of political purity. However, Destiny's magnanimous encomium is not devoid of rebuke. For even within Kulinsky's pragmatic orbit, there lurks the spectre of rhetorical hybris, a tendency to stoke flames that cannot easily be extinguished. Destiny, with the precision of a logician and the cynicism of Diogenes himself, warns of rhetoric's irreversibility. Once you have convinced your audience that the Democratic Party is complicit in perpetual malevolence, once you have depicted them as lovers of indiscriminate violence and imperialist malfeasance, there is no facile path to reconciliation. Words, once sown, take root, and their fruit is seldom under the gardener's control. The comparison to Trump is not hyperbole. It is prophetic. Trump, in his wanton crusade against COVID's veracity, could not later claim credit for the vaccine's creation. His audience, once inflamed by conspiracy, could no longer hear the clarion call of reason. Similarly, Destiny posits Kulinsky and his ideological compatriots risk alienating their base through rhetoric untethered to electoral pragmatism. It is a fine line, one that requires, as Destiny exhorts, mentis gravitas and a deeper perceptio politicus. Criticism of American foreign policy, particularly vis-à-vis Palestine and Israel, is both legitimate and necessary. To suggest otherwise would be to don the mantle of intellectual cowardice. Yet such criticism must exist within the ineluctable parameters of American political structure, a binary from which there is no escape. Kulinsky, though admirable in his willingness to lambast Democrats, must guard against rhetoric that veers into absolutism. For the alternative, as Destiny underscores with vigor, is a Republican resurgence governed by Rubio's hawkish obstinance and Huckabee's theocratic fervor. Herein lies the brilliance of Destiny's admonition, a call for criticism within the confines of reality. It is not a rejection of dissent, but an insistence upon its contextualization. We may, as Kulinsky often does, chastise Joe Biden or Kamala Harris for their shortcomings et merito. But such condemnation must be tempered by the understanding that the alternative is far worse. To disregard this calculus is to abandon the realm of praxis for the abyss of ideological nihilism. The online discourse, as Destiny observes with palpable exasperation, is often sullied by performative radicalism. Pundits who decry the United States as the ne plus ultra of global malevolence without recognizing the comparative worse that awaits under Republican hegemony. This rhetoric, however satisfying in its incendiary appeal, alienates the very voters it seeks to mobilize. Destiny, ever the master of rationis prudentia, advocates for a greater depth of analysis, a criticism that does not eviscerate pragmatism but elevates it. Kulinsky's ability to criticize without descending into nihilistic chaos is therefore both his strength and his challenge. It is a strength because it allows for accountability without acquiescence. It is a challenge because it demands unrelenting vigilance to ensure that rhetoric does not metastasize into electoral paralysis. Destiny, in his Roast Come Praise, issues this warning not as a rebuke, but as a plea for a criticism that is both passionate and pragmatic, trenchant yet tethered to reality. The role of the critic, Destiny reminds us, is not merely to denounce, but to construct. It is easy, facile in excelsis, to cry foul, to rend garments and proclaim doom. It is far harder to temper criticism with a vision of progress, to offer solutions within the imperfect frameworks we inhabit. Kulinsky, in Destiny's estimation, approaches this ideal, but must remain vigilant lest he lose sight of the broader stakes. Thus, we arrive at Destiny's final exhortation. Criticism, yes, vigorous, unrelenting and unsparing. But let it be criticus cum causa, a critique that recognizes its own limitations and contextualizes its aspirations. The Democratic Party, flawed as it is, remains the lesser of two evils in a political landscape defined by stark binary choice. To pretend otherwise is to invite calamity. Destiny's praise of Kulinsky, therefore, is not mere flattery, but an invitation to deepen the discourse, to sharpen the critique, and to wield rhetoric with the precision of a scalpel rather than the recklessness of a cudgel. In this dialectical symphony, Destiny emerges as both conductor and critic. His words a clarion call for cogitative sobriety. Kulinsky, praised for his bravery, is also cautioned against rhetorical hubris. The path forward, as Destiny delineates with crystalline clarity, is one of pragmatism. Critique within context, dissent without destruction, progress over performativity. And thus, dear interlocutors, let us heed this call, for in a world awash with rhetorical chaos, reason must remain our steadfast compass.